Hello, and welcome to my podcast, Good Grief. My name is Dr. Christine Malone, and in this podcast, we talk about trauma, tragedy, and survival. In each episode, I will interview someone that has gone through grief in some way, and we will discuss the impact it has had on their life. By sharing these stories, we hope that others won't feel alone should they be going through similar situations. Enjoy. Okay. Thanks so much to our guest for joining us today. My guest today is going to tell us a bit about her story with her dad and her family. So if you would please tell us just a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, my name is Erin Thornberry, formerly Erin Noseworthy. That's my maiden name. I'm a mom, for first and foremost, of two beautiful boys. One is 5 and one is a year and a half. I currently reside outside of Boston, but have lived in a variety of places, and my husband is from the South. But I'm originally from Atlantic City, New Jersey. That's where I grew up, outside of Atlantic City, New Jersey. And I am the child of someone who immigrated from Ireland. And then my father's family is also of Irish descent. So an Irish Catholic family, I guess you could say, living in New Jersey. And I also am an educator. So I work in higher ed, training faculty, developing online courses, but started out actually in the arts and somehow migrated into higher ed and technology.
Yeah. Happens, isn't it? Where it's like you start thinking you're going to do something else and you realize, wait a minute, how did I get over here? But
Yeah.
it's where you want to be and you're happy with it. Fantastic. So
Mhm.
great. Thank you. So tell us a little bit about your dad, maybe family experience, kind of the story that you want to share with us.
Yeah. So my dad, and I feel like this is kind of stereotypical, but my dad was one of those larger than life personalities. He was the, focal point of the parties. He could talk to anybody. He was such a great storyteller and just could make anybody laugh. There are so many things about my dad that even as a child, I wanted to emulate his ability. He was just really outgoing. He was very generous, could talk to anybody, just really kind, giving person. But he had his demons. He was, which I didn't recognize until I was much older. Even after what happened, which we'll talk about in a little bit. He was an alcoholic. I don't know if it was all of my life. I actually don't know when it got really bad. My family, we're social drinkers. I don't want to equate that with being Irish. That's not really fair, but we're definitely love to be together, love to party, love to have a reason to celebrate, and it usually includes alcohol of some kind. So it was always something that was part of our life. But then, reflecting back on it, I remember he was my softball coach. He was my basketball coach. He was my soccer coach. He was my biggest fan in everything that I did. I could really do no wrong. But thinking back on some of those experiences, I remember whispers of, people on my team saying certain things and me just not really connecting the dots until much later. It's probably college that I started to realize, like, I was away from home in college and I would come home and be like, oh, this is a problem. This is getting bad. But then looking back on other moments in my childhood, realizing like it's been a problem for a while, actually. And that was kind of a shadow throughout. But he was really very loved by the whole family. And yeah, just kind of like the focal point for a lot of our family events. He was Santa at our Christmas parties. So that's the kind of person he was. He loved family, and he really instilled in me values that I still hold very closely today.
I think having had alcoholic parents myself, I think one of the stigmas that happen is we don't talk about that elephant in the room, right? So growing up, of course, I'm older than you are, but growing up, we never talked about it. And I remember even as an adult, I made a comment one time to my stepmom about my father being an alcoholic, which he was from the time he woke up to the time he went to bed, he was drunk all the time. Um, and I remember her telling me, she was like shocked and upset with me that I said that. And I thought, oh, I'm speaking like, okay, it's snowing outside. I mean, it's, to me, it's so obvious, and
Obvious.
it was,
Yeah.
we just don't talk about. So I think that's probably sounds like some similar there, where, especially if they're high functioning, right? It's like you can still take a job, have a job, and do these sport things, whatever. But um,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, I
but
remember, and he commuted really far for work. He worked very hard. He commuted really far for work. He did, all the maintenance of our house and our cars. He was a very intelligent person. He could teach himself anything. So he, ended up just being kind of like Mr. Fix It around the house, and then just worked really hard to support his family. And so, um, I it was something that he kept hidden, for sure. But I have since learned that he was not the only one. There were other members of my family who I spent time with who also potentially had an issue with alcohol. And it is, something that is still, I think, goes unsaid. My family still interacts the same way today. Not that I would want them to be any other way, but it was never something that is, as you were saying, like talked about openly as
it's like a hidden,
yeah.
secret, if you will, and especially if I mean, your dad sounds like he had nicer features than some other alcoholics I know, where it's like, really there's not a lot of positive, but yeah, still, the not talking about it doesn't help anybody whatsoever, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, he did he did have a temper for sure, but I think that those were things that other people didn't necessarily see. There was the parties with everybody and the family get-togethers, and all the wonderful things that I've already said, but then there was the times at home. And uh I remember even from a really little girl trying to ensure that nothing would make him angry. If there was something, oh, he can't find the remote,
Mm,
let me figure out where the remote is. Or, oh my gosh, he's trying to make spaghetti and we might be out of sauce. What could we do? Trying to problem solve to make sure that that person didn't come out.
yep.
It's just something that you don't really that's just how my life was. It wasn't something that I recognized later as like, oh, he probably, if he hadn't been drinking, he probably wouldn't have had that kind. Maybe he would have, I don't know. But yeah, there was definitely a temper that I made every effort to try to avoid, and
Yeah.
ended up being, a very hard worker myself, I guess.
Yeah,
Because
this
of
was your norm.
it. Mhm.
So what eventually happened with your dad?
Um, so I was away at college, and I think I mentioned, I rarely came home from college. I spent summers away. I would come home for the occasional holiday. I think I came home for the first summer, and it had gotten obviously really bad. I remember being in the car with him shortly after I started college, and I forget where we were driving, but uh, he had a plastic cup of some kind in the cup holder in the car. And me having been away at college, I'm like, that is completely full of alcohol, like hard alcohol. I don't know if it's vodka or what it is, but it is a giant plastic cup full of alcohol, and he's driving. He won't let me drive. Um, so that had gotten really bad. And every evening it just seemed like I was arguing with him, my mom was arguing with him. It was just really unpleasant environment to be in. And so I didn't come home very often. And my family has a big party every summer that we call the cousins party, where all of the cousins get together up in New York. And it's a weekend long event, and I had always gone my whole life. And the last couple times I've gone, you know, it's just a full on, drinking marathon all weekend long. And I was just tired of it. Like, I had members of the family. It was mostly like a male dominated party. And I had always gone because I was the daughter, and, got my mom would go and I would get drug along. And I just decided, you know what? I'm not going this year. I don't feel like it. I don't feel like dealing with it. I'm going to do my own thing. And the family got together. And apparently my dad started fights with everyone that weekend, which I think is fairly common for this particular situation. And the weekend went really poorly for everyone. Came home. He had a big fight with my brother. I have a younger brother who's he's about 3.5 years younger than me. He was 16 at the time. I was 20. And they all came home from the weekend. Everybody was just not getting along. And my mom woke up in the morning and my dad wasn't in bed, and she couldn't find him in the house. He hadn't, wasn't sleeping on the couch. And I believe she went looking for him and went into the garage and found him on the floor of the garage. And I believe she, he was cold, but she went over. He's a big man. She was trying to turn him over. She wasn't able to. So I was away. She called my brother, and he came down, and they were trying to turn him over and figure out what happened. And he had passed, and they called 911, and they came and they checked it out. And he had actually hung himself in the garage. I think he used an electrical cable to hang himself from the rafters of our garage. I think, one of the biggest things that just breaks my heart is my brother being there and me not being there with them. Still to this day is really difficult for me to think about him having to find my dad like that. I I got a call later that day from my aunt, one of my aunts, telling me that my dad had passed. And I remember that phone call vividly. My boyfriend at the time was at my apartment. I was in State College, Pennsylvania, so I was about 4 hours away from home at the time. We were planning on going on a trip. We were going to go camping. And my phone rang a couple times and I just ignored it. I was sleeping in on a Saturday. I think it was a Saturday or Sunday. I can't remember what. No, it must have been Monday because they had been at the cousin's party. But I was there for summer. I didn't really have classes over the summer. So I kind of ignored it a couple times. Then finally, like, somebody is really trying to get a hold of me. So I answered the phone. It was my aunt, and she asked if anybody else was there for her to talk to. If Mike was there, it was my boyfriend at the time. And I just sort of handed him the phone, not really thinking about it. And then, as he is talking, I realize, oh, there's something wrong. There's something really seriously wrong. And my immediate thought was my brother. He was kind of struggling at the time with school and other issues. And so I thought, oh my God, something's happened to my brother. So I was, just kind of waiting for him to get off the phone. And I feel for him. He had to tell me actually that my father had passed. And I just remember just screaming. It was so unexpected. I could not believe that he was gone. It just didn't seem possible. And then I had to drive 4 hours home, to find out what had happened. And I didn't have any information at the time. I knew that he was found at home, and so the whole ride home, I'm like, what could have possibly happened? I don't understand. You know, I can't imagine what could have happened. And I got home, and I honestly don't even remember what I was told, because I'm sure there were some people who didn't tell me, but my mom had always been honest, and I'm pretty sure she told me what happened. Um, but for whatever reason, I could not accept that that was what had happened. And I began this long process of denying that that is what had actually happened. It sounds terrible now, and I'm like, I have a hard time even sharing this with people, but my dad had, he had this thing that he would always do, like, oh, you don't love, jokingly, you don't love me, you don't love me. I love you so much, you don't love me. And, like, oh, dad, whatever, whatever. And then, he would say, I'm just going to go out to the garage and I'm going to kill myself. I mean, he had literally said that to me. And when so you don't say that to your kid and then actually do it, was just like, I could not, it was the cognitive dissonance. It was just like, I could not fathom someone that he would do this to me. I knew he was struggling, but he sounds arrogant, but he loved me too much to do this. He would not do this to us. So I just didn't believe it. And it was 7 years before I would admit that that is what he actually did.
So you use the term "do this to me." I
Yeah.
know in my work with survivors of suicide that there's kind of a mixed group where there are some. I'm thinking about a colleague of mine whose son committed suicide, and I think one of her coping mechanisms is to think that his depression and so on, that he thought he was doing her a favor. So
Mhm.
she says she's never been angry with him, she's never blamed him. Whereas there are others who said, well, they did this to me. I mean, he left me, he chose to, those types of things, which again can be, I think, really difficult, because you're not only grieving the loss of someone you cared about, you've known your whole life, but to have their death be something they caused, right? No matter what's going on in their head, but they actually caused that, they did that final thing. So 7 years. Did anybody in your family during that time talk about it, or was this just something that nobody talked about?
My mom always tried to get me to talk about it. And she did require me to go to therapy. I went to therapy, at the end of I spent the rest of the summer at home, obviously, after that happened. And I had actually decided I wasn't going to go back to school. I was entering my last year of college at the time. And I was like, I can't possibly leave. I can't leave my mom. I can't leave my brother. Um, but she convinced me to go back. And then she also required that I see a therapist while I was there. So she always tried to kind of break through and, get me to understand that that it is what actually happened, and that I needed to come to grips with it. And I remember telling her, Mom, what does it matter? I'm surviving. What does it matter? What I think, if I can get through, does it really matter? Um, and it does. It does matter. Yeah, because it eats you up inside. Well, at least it ate me up inside. It Over the course of the next couple of years, I stayed with the same person when I probably shouldn't have stayed with them, that college boyfriend. I think I just needed somebody. Um and he had his own traumas from his youth that he didn't talk about, so I didn't have to talk about mine. We had kind of that mutual understanding, I think, and unspoken understanding of each other. But I ended up cheating on him with a much older man, who was actually connected to my work at the time. So potentially put myself in danger of losing my job. I lost my relationship. I was unable to, talk to anyone about what had actually happened with my dad, what was happening in my relationship, what was happening at work. It just became everything was, something that I tried to process internally. So I lost friends because I wasn't able to be honest or truthful with them and connect with them on the level that you need to sustain, any kind of relationship. So, um, I actually this person that I was dating from college, we eloped. We got engaged formally. Everybody knew we were engaged, and then we were supposed to, have a big wedding, but we eloped instead. And then we were going to plan a wedding, and then we never actually got married because I started cheating on him with this other person, and then broke that off and had to admit to at least my mom that I had eloped. So just things completely, I mean, I guess they are in my character. I did them, but not things that brought me joy or make me proud at all. Um, but it was this person that I was having an affair with that I don't remember how it came up. He had his own issues. But he asked me about my family, he asked me about my dad, and I just said, yeah, he took his life. And just like that was something that I had told everybody all the time. And in fact, it was the first time that I had ever said it aloud to anybody. And that was sort of the darkest point in my life because everything around me was crumbling, but it was also kind of like, oh, this huge exhale of all of this stuff that had been building up inside. And it was almost like stream of it wasn't something that I consciously did. It just came out. And that was sort of the turning point for how my approach to losing my dad. And it wasn't something that it wasn't like the next day I woke up and I was okay with everything or anything like that, but it was sort of like, okay, now I can actually start to process what had actually happened instead of sharing this story that just, it wasn't true. So
Yeah. So from that point on is when you were actually able to, admit to that to people as well as to yourself. Was the turning point?
yeah, and I remember consciously thinking, it's hard to tell people that someone has taken their life. And I remember, I think I had actually shortly after that, I went to suicide support group session. And I just kind of sat in the background. I didn't really share. But I remember people talking about a lot of it. It's embedded in in our culture. Like, as I'm not practicing Catholic, but I grew up Irish Catholic. It's a sin. It's considered a sin. Many places you can't be buried in a proper cemetery if have done this. And it, why do we say commit suicide when, you commit crimes? You don't, is it a crime? this, and and in the Catholic Church, I guess it is, but it's embedded in the way we talk about it. So I remember being in this support group, and then talking about this, and me feeling like, yes, gosh, why is it so hard for me to tell people what happened? Why do I feel so much, I don't, shame isn't the right term, because I'm not ashamed of what my dad did, but it's almost like, maybe fear is better. And so I started to make a conscious effort to, as hard as it is to tell people, if it comes up, just say it. Let yourself free yourself of this burden. It is not yours. Whatever their perspective is on it, that's their burden. It's not yours. So I decided I'm going to change the way I talk about it. And if it comes up, I'm just going to let it out. And so, I've died by suicide, died of depression. I've really tried not to say committed suicide, just from my own sort of thinking it through. And I remember it coming up in conversations, because I was young, I was 20 when it happened. So people realizing that, I didn't have one of my parents, what happened? And just saying, he died by suicide. And having people actually tell me, I wish you wouldn't have told me that. And that's part of it, my background is like, I am conflict averse. As a child, I was a pleaser. It was really important to me not to upset my parents. And so it is something that I continue to struggle with, to, tell people things that could potentially upset them. But I realized, for my own mental health, I have to say what actually happened. And I'm sorry if that offends you, but it shouldn't. I realize that it shouldn't, but I have to say it for my own
Yeah.
health.
Yeah,
So,
no,
yeah.
I completely understand exactly what you're saying there. So, as you think back to, especially those 7 years from the time Dad died to when you could actually, say it and admit it, um, what do you think, if you were talking to that person, your former self, your younger self, I mean, you were already in therapy. Sounds like Mom had you in therapy. So, what do you think could have helped you, could have gotten you through, to that spot of starting to heal without having those, 7 years of what I think kind of sounds like limbo?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure that there's anything that could have changed it, but I'm trying to change it for my kids. Um, my eldest, who's 5, already knows that his grandfather isn't here, that he died of an illness. Um, so I'm trying to have those conversations earlier with him, um, because I think it is so important for us to change the perception of suicide, um, to bring it, as I mentioned to you, in our email correspondence, to bring it out of the shadows. It should be something that we can all talk openly about, and I think that that's the only way that we can also, stop it from happening to more people. That's my greatest fear, is this is not something that my alcoholism isn't something that my dad chose. He was medicating himself because he was probably suffering from some mental illness that he didn't feel he could talk openly about or seek help for. And I don't ever want my children to think that there's anything wrong with them if they're depressed. You know, there's multiple ways that we can help people who struggle with mental illness. And so we have to talk about it differently. We have to talk about it often. We have to talk about it openly, so that there is no shame involved in it. I don't think there was any way, maybe it could have been a shorter period of time, but I don't think there was any way that I could have had a different reaction. Because it's still not something that my family's able to talk about, that men get depressed
Yes. Yes. No, I think
just
that's
like the rest of us do.
very
And
culturally. Yeah.
there is nothing wrong with getting help for that.
Yeah. So, question for you, when you, again, I'm going to go back to where you said, he did this to me.
Mm-hmm.
Do you feel like you have forgiven him for that? Or can you look at, his obviously depression, mental illness, whatever. I mean, I don't think a person who's doesn't have those things gets to that point, um, where you can kind of focus on that and say, well, this is what it was. It wasn't something that was to me, right? It wasn't that he didn't love me or didn't want to be with me.
Yeah, no, I definitely don't see this as something that he did to me anymore. I um have no ill will towards him whatsoever. Um, I just find it incredibly, incredibly sad, that he was in so much pain, that this was the only option that he saw.
Yeah.
And I don't think that there's anything that could have, in the moment, been done to stop it. So I also don't feel any guilt, because I don't think there was anything I could do or another member of my family could have done, at that point. But it is still incredibly sad to think about that he was so alone and felt so alone in those final moments that he didn't see any other way out of it. Yeah.
No, I completely understand what you're saying. I completely understand that. I think for me, after my first husband took his own life, I was angry. I was really, really angry. How could he do this to me? And how could he do this to my children? Right. That was
Mhm.
very, very angry. And then it did take me quite some time not to admit that he'd taken his life, but to um, realize that it was, again, what you just said, a lot of pain. And then I felt like, wow, I'm almost being selfish by being angry because this person was in so much pain. And that was something I had to get over, and my spot with that. And it took me a while, but I did finally get there. So is there anything else you'd like to share with our listeners about, your situation, what you would, I know you're a proponent for speaking up about, mental illness and suicide and so on. And I think that's admirable. I think we all need to do more of that. So is there anything else you'd like to share though?
I would just like people to recognize how common it is. I don't think people realize until it happens to them or in their own sphere how incredibly common suicide is.
Yeah.
Um, it is.
Yeah.
It's everywhere. If you look, it is everywhere. And since happening to me, I know of many, many other instances, even within my own sphere, where it has happened. So it's not something that happens to, alcoholics or drug
Yeah.
addicts,
Yeah.
or, it
Yeah.
it
It
is
isn't
a
just one
potential
socio.
end for any of
Yeah.
us
It's not just
if
one
we find
socioeconomic
ourselves.
class
Yeah.
or ethnicity or whatever. It crosses all
Mhm.
all borders. I do want you to know that when this podcast posts, that we will be posting information on phone numbers and so on for people who are feeling depressed and feeling like they might harm themselves. So that is something we're going to do. It is my belief that we should all have that information handy, not that all of us would get to the point of being, depressed respondent to have that, but to also feel comfortable having that conversation with our colleagues, our family, our children. I love that you're talking with your kids even at a young age because, um, if you hide it from them, it'll still be that shadow secret thing that, um, makes it shameful, dirty, whatever term you want to use,
Yeah.
which really is not good, especially for our young people. So thank you
Yeah.
for doing that.
Yeah. I mean, you go to the doctor, you tell them if your parent has had cancer, you should be telling them if your parent has died by suicide. And
Yeah,
I want my boys to be able to share that information openly. So if something happens to them along the course of their lives, they can get the help that they need.
yeah. Well, good for
Mhm.
you. Thank you so much, Erin. I really appreciate
Thank
you being with
you.
us today.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Good Grief. To hear more about my personal story, please pick up a copy of the book, The Spider Killer, a memoir of trauma, tragedy, and survival. You can find the book on Amazon and Kindle.